and welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today we have a very, very special interview. I'm going to be talking with Mai-Lan Tomsen Bokovec. She is the VP of the block and object storage for AWS, S3 and EBS, and Glacier as well. I'm a huge fan of her. I've been following her in multiple reinvents and events that she has been talking to. So for me, it was an honor to have a chance to chat with her. So in this interview, we talk a little bit about her career because she has a very interesting career and her leadership, how she leads something like S3 that is so simple and it's been for 15 years out there. So we talk about that, and also we talk about architecting for the future, how to modernize your data architectures, and many things. So let's get to the interview. So hello, Mai-Lan. Thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited that you're here. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Marcia?
I'm good. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. You have been one of my inspirations as a woman in tech. I've been following you around for quite a long time. And then when I was like, yeah, I should invite her to my podcast to talk about S3, then I started doing a little research and I learned how amazing your journey has been. So I would love to start there. How you end up in cloud, how you end up leading S3 and the object store and all these services. So maybe you can walk us a little bit from your beginnings.
Well, I think, Marcia, it's a non-traditional path. So you'll have to walk with me a little bit on this journey. So when I graduated from university, I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had spent my childhood growing up in different countries all over the world. My father is a career U.S. diplomat. And so I was born in India, as an example, in the British Hospital of New Delhi. And my father was part of the U.S. Embassy. And so we moved from India. We spent 4 years in Moscow. We were over 5 years in Beijing, in China. And those are just some of the countries that we lived in. And so I had spent most of my life growing up overseas in large cities as part of the U.S. Embassy community, learning about new cultures, learning new languages. And I went to a boarding school for high school in the U.S., and then I went to college in the U.S. And after I got done with university, I didn't know what to do, as I'm sure many people have experienced as well. And so I joined the Peace Corps, the U.S. Peace Corps. And my father had been a Peace Corps volunteer right after it started. And so he was from Ohio, and he went to Nepal as part of his Peace Corps volunteer work. And that set him on his whole path to being a U.S. diplomat. And so for me, I graduated from University of California, San Diego, and I went to Mali, to northern Mali, as a forestry Peace Corps volunteer. In northern Mali at that time had decades of drought. And so a lot of my work was working with villages to plant trees and to try to reforest what had become a desert. And so my projects included the reforestation, but also I worked with a women co-op. It was very informal. But basically, the Women Co-op were a collection of wives that had set up essentially an economic network between women of all these different villages, where some villages would create cloth and some villages would create the dye. And they created textiles, bogolan, it's called, a Malian textile, that we would then sell in markets to intrepid tourists who happened to turn up in the markets. And so I had one set of projects where I wrote away from microloans to try to help education programs for the children of villages. And I had another set of programs that involved working with these women co-ops. And in my experience, living in a village, no running water, no electricity, 110 degrees, which actually didn't bother me that much because I had been used to very hot climates. I realized something, Marcia. I realized that human talent is everywhere. I realized that, when I'm working with people who have no formal education, none, and yet they are working with mathematical systems, and they're working with essentially networks, and they're creating economies that are supporting dozens of families. It was a huge wake-up call for me that, wow, you can look around wherever you are. You can look at yourself inside and say, there's a lot of talent here, and a lot of progress, a lot of advancement, a lot of change is just driven from unpacking that talent and letting it loose. So that was my first big realization that today, that carries forward today in everything I do. The second thing was, wow, technology makes a big difference. And so when I was working with, in the Peace Corps, the families that had even a tiny bit of technology, and really technology could be bicycles, it could be a satellite phone. If somebody was very lucky, it made a difference, not just for that generation, but for many generations of that family. And so when I came back from Peace Corps, I decided to go into tech because I knew technology made a huge difference. And I went back and I took classes at the University of Washington here in Seattle, programming classes, and then I went into the tech industry. I started first at Microsoft, and then about 11 years ago, I came over to Amazon Web Services, and I've been here ever since, just loving it.
That's super cool. So basically, you have a revelation in Mali and change your career. And I think that's something a lot of women ask me a lot, like, oh, I have done, I don't know, journalism, and I want to get into tech. Is too late? No. Mm-hmm. And whatever you do in the past helps you. I imagine that helped you also to understand computer science, like all the background that you came from your studies and your experience in Mali and whatever you do in the past. So
I think, Marcia, like for the advice that I would give for that case that you're talking about, where you have somebody who's coming from maybe a non-technical background and they want to go into technology, the thing I think about is you just have to have relentless curiosity. If you have relentless curiosity, you just want to figure out how it works, how you can write code to make it work, how you can put the pieces together in a system to scale in a way, that you're going from 0 to 60 in adoption. And you're constantly figuring those puzzles, out. I think that's a huge starting point, because that's what we do in technology. We figure it out.
Definitely. I always say that for getting into IT, curiosity and a high tolerance for frustration are the two most important skills, because things fail all the time and you need to be prepared for it.
That's right.
And you're also a mom. So I imagine you, at least now that I'm a mom of a little kid, I learned like teaching curiosity is one of the most important things. Kids are by nature curious, but if you start like working on those skills like early on, they become like little scientists. Like humans are amazing at developing that kind of skills. So
I totally agree. I have 3 kids, Marcia, and when they were growing up, they're older than yours now. But when they were growing up, I found that as a parent, one of the most interesting things that you can do to help nurture that curiosity is just ask questions. If you just ask your 4-year-old, your 6-year-old, your 10-year-old, your 12-year-old questions about, what they're studying, what they're thinking, what their observations are in the course of a walk with you and the dog. You're constantly incubating that curiosity. And that's something that I play forward too in my role as a vice president here in AWS, is I'm always asking questions.
Yes. How you move those like learnings from were you a parent before getting into tech, or it happens more at the same time? Did it help you to also your experience in Mali to become a better leader? How that worked?
Well, I think there's, I think for me, I became a parent while I was working. So I had been working for a few years. I got pregnant with my first kid, and then all 3 of my kids are 2 years apart. So there's a fair amount of being pregnant and having kids, some period of time where I did that. And I was a manager at the time too. So, how to navigate the young kid zone as a working parent, it can be challenging. It can be, frankly, exhausting. But I think for me, the things that I always carry forward, whether I'm a parent or I'm in my work mode, is I try to be fully present in the mode. Okay, so Marcia, when you work in a DevOps environment, you carry a pager. It's just part of working in a DevOps environment. And the way that I operate today, even, but certainly as the kids were growing up, is I would just turn the volume of the pager up very high, and I would put it in another room. I would put my phone and all of my electronics in another room. And so when I'm with my children, I'm present. I'm not looking at a phone thinking, oh, I'm just looking real quick, they won't notice. I never did that. When they were growing up, my electronics were physically separate from me when I was in parenting mode, so I could be fully present in the moment. And so that idea of, as a working parent, how can you be 100% with whoever you're with, I think is an incredibly important concept, not just for your kids, but also for your team, where you're looking at your team and they know you're present. They know you know their names. They know you're going to comment and fully engage in the moment, the review, the topic that you haven't had.
Yeah, and also I think that the being fully present is, as a developer or as part of a tech team, is also very important, because multitasking and being in 20 places at the same time breaks your work and your flow and so definitely that's a great advice. So let's move subjects a little bit and talk a little bit about S3, because I always say that S3 is one of my favorite services because it's the first serverless service. Let's be honest. They invented the concept of serverless. Super simple. It started very small, and now it's I remember Werner showed it in one of the reInvent keynotes. I think you were part of it as well. The complexity that there is with all these microservices, but you managed to keep the service simple, and it's so easy to get started with it. Even it does a lot of things. So how you design for the future? How you prepare a service that will scale and will be the backbone for so many operations and applications in the future?
Well, I think if you think about scale, I think S3 embodies AWS scale. We have over 200 trillion objects in S3 now, well over, Marcia. And S3 was, as you say, the first AWS service 16 years ago. And it started out with those 8 microservices. And today we have well over 250. And I think when you're scaling a service, just like when you're scaling a team, you want to think about how to do that in a way where people can have deep ownership of the code. And so we could have made the decision, Marcia, to take those 8 microservices and to scale them vertically, to just keep on adding more and more capabilities to each of those microservices until each of those microservices were as big as an AWS service itself. But we didn't. We took the step of creating different microservices over time, and each of those microservices do 1 or 2 things really well, but not more than that. That is an incredibly useful design pattern for when you're building something that you don't know. Like when we started for S3 16 years ago, we didn't know it was going to be as big as it did, but we designed for it. And the way to design for it is to make sure that you are building those individual pieces that do 1 or 2 things really well, and they scale individually to do what you need it to do. And so I think that is one concept that we stuck with for S3, which is a design pattern to scale out and not up. So each one of those microservices, those 250 plus microservices that I talk about, they have to scale individually to pretty astounding amounts of transaction per service and usage. But because it's only doing 1 or 2 things really, really well, you're able to build that scale in much more easily, and you're able to have a team that does nothing but focus on what that particular piece does. The second thing I would say is that we always start first from what the customer is doing, and we work backward from that, Marcia. And customers expect the simplicity. They expect the ease of getting started, but they expect the ease of scaling. And so when customers expect that from you, you build it for them. Yeah, and I would say the third thing is that we try real... What's that?
Because I don't think customers knew that they needed S3 before S3 was born. They were thinking of servers, of places that they were very restricted, and maybe they wanted something very big like that. But I don't think like nobody imagined S3 before S3, and all the features that is coming, they're always very like innovative. So what the customer wants, how you figure that out? Because if you ask the customer maybe before S3 was born, they will tell you, I need a bigger, very big place to store my files, or I need very big servers with a lot of capacity, but they will not tell you like they need S3.
I know, but what's really interesting is that customers will tell you what problem they're trying to solve. That's where we start. So a customer might not say, I need S3, but a customer will say, I don't know how my storage is going to grow. Right now I have this amount of storage, and it's possible that my application will grow very fast, but it's possible that it won't. So I need a storage solution that can expand or contract in a way that my application, that's driven by the patterns of my application. And so when we built S3, we built it for that elasticity. Or more recently, Marcia, we had back in, I believe it was in 2017, 2018. It was 2016, 2017. We started to hear feedback from customers of data lakes. And our data lake customers were telling us, boy, I'm going to run my business on this. It's too important to make decisions without the right data. You know, every business is a data business, and I need the technology that backs that up. And so they were moving to more of a data lake model to run their business, and they were pulling together all kinds of data from different sources to use as part of that data analytics. And so you had a situation where they had no crystal ball that they could look into and say, well, my data is going to grow in these different ways. They just knew it was growing. It was different types of data, and they didn't want to track the data patterns. And so what they did is they told us what problem they had, and we built intelligent tiering, which is the first and only storage class that's out there today. And what intelligent tiering does is it dynamically prices the storage for an object based on your access patterns. And so if you access your storage once a month or more, you pay the same price as standard. If you don't access your storage for 30 days, you pay 40% cheaper for that month. And if you don't access that storage for 90 consecutive days, you actually pay 68% less for that storage for that month. And there's no retrieval charges that's associated with actually using the storage class because it's built into the storage class. That we launched in 2018. And it was all based on having conversations with customers where they told us what the problem was. And we invented something that to this day, nobody else has.
Yeah, that's amazing. But how you create the culture for that kind of innovation, that type of like people being able to take like these amazing ideas out of a hat, because nobody have done this before. It's not that they can go and get inspiration from others.
Well, in AWS, we're part of Amazon, and Amazon has these leadership principles. And the leadership principles really help us incubate innovation because they talk about invent and simplify as an example. But within the culture of the team itself, Marcia, we're constantly pushing ourselves to think in new ways. We're not bound by what the definition of storage is in a hardware appliance. We can invent a new experience based on what customers are asking for because we're always we're not locked into this predefinition. I'll give you an example, Marcia. We have this concept of an S3 bucket, as you know, which is what people use as a logical container, if you will, for storage. And if you think about that logical container for storage, it has a bucket policy that's associated with permissions, to set permissions and access privileges for the data in your bucket. And so as I said, we had more and more customers looking to store petabytes and sometimes exabytes in their data lakes. They said we have many different applications running on that single bucket. Whereas before, 16 years ago, you might have 1 or 2 applications using a bucket. Now people have dozens of applications using one single bucket. And they said, how can you help me have multiple applications, maybe hundreds of applications using a single bucket, and using that bucket permission, the bucket policy was getting more and more complicated. And so we created an abstraction called access points. And access points are basically unique host names on top of the bucket where you can have one access point for one application. And you can build in all of these different access points, which are ephemeral and free of charge because it's S3. We really look to make it low-cost storage. And each of those access points have their own permissions on it, their own policies on it. And by that concept, again, not something that's available in either traditional storage or any other cloud storage, you're able to abstract away access permissions, all coming into the same bucket, but you're able to set it up as read-only for one application, or you're able to set it up as VPC only for all the access points coming into your bucket. And you move away from that monolithic bucket policy into something that's much more flexible and works with a new application pattern of hundreds of applications accessing your storage. And so those are the type of things you can invent when you sit down with your team and you say, start first from the customer, work backwards from that customer problem, and we'll come up with these concepts now and in the future based on what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's super cool, and that's something that I love from working at AWS, that you can really get one customer piece of feedback and from there like build a full feature. Like it's awesome. Maybe you can share a little bit of that process, because for me that was quite unique. How from like customer like feedback that you were saying, something happens. How that works? Can you share a little bit?
I think the place it starts, Marcia, is actually having the conversation with the customer. And by that, I really mean it's a dialogue. We start first from saying, tell us what it is that you're trying to do, not just within the overall departments that we're working with, but really, what is your business trying to do? If you were to look forward 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, what is the goal of what you're trying to achieve? And where do you think your teams, both as developers, right, but also as people who are building applications for your own customers, what are you trying to do with your own DevOps type of processes, as well as the outcomes that your applications are doing? And then we listen and we ask questions. And then we brainstorm together. And then we come up with what, I kind of think of as a true statement, which is, here's the thing that our customer is trying to make true. And it might not be true today. It might be aspirational today, but it is something that our customers deeply want to make true. And then we're in it with them. We're building capabilities that help make that true statement true in the time frame that the customer wants. But it all starts from those conversations, Marcia. It's really important to actually sit down and talk with your customers, and we do that all the time.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, let us know what is your problems, what we can help you. And people like sometimes laugh at me, like, why you care about my problems? Well, because that. So yes. I hope I will record this statement and play it when people tell me, like, you will not do anything with my problems. Yes, I will. So I like that what you were saying about the data lakes, because I noticed that I work in the industry of gaming before coming into AWS, and basically in that industry we store everything. Basically every click the user does, it goes to S3, everything, and I think that's quite a normal pattern that people are storing everything because storage is so cheap and it's scale and you don't need to worry about it. But I think then it comes the problem, like organizations need to maybe modernize the way they manage the data, because some organizations store everything, but they don't have like patterns or best practices on what to do with that data. They don't know how to read it. They don't know how to collect it. How you will say that they can get started with that, and even how maybe serverless process can help them. I don't know what is your what you would recommend to customers to get started with that.
The first step is to store everything. And the reason for that, Marcia, is it's not just data lakes, it's machine learning. In the fullness of time, every business is going to be using machine learning, if they're not doing it today, for not just business decision making, but also automation of delivery, logistics. There's so much that machine learning can help us with as modern businesses. And it all starts from the data. And the way that it works with machine learning is that you have to have vast amounts of information, and you have to have source information to build those models. IDC says that digital data is growing at a rate of 40% year over year. And if customers aren't able to save the data, then they're making decisions that might impact the data analytics and the machine learning of tomorrow, because they're not saving the raw source information that your business might need. And it might be gaming, it might be paper products in manufacturing. I mean, pick your industry. It's all data that can be used by a business in the future. And making the wrong decision now about storage of that data can actually hurt you in the future. That is one of the reasons why S3 has spent so much time in building low-cost solutions for storage. And whether it's Glacier Deep Archive, which is less than 1/10 of a cent to store a gigabyte of data per month, or it's Glacier Instant Retrieval, which we launched last year, which is 0.4 of a cent for storing data in Glacier, but with instant retrieval. Our goal is to make it so cost effective to store all your data that you don't have to make that decision. And in fact, Marcia, we have tons of customers that rather than throwing out the data or not moving it from a data center into the cloud because they just don't know what they're going to do with it, they put it in Glacier Deep Archive. It's actually the fastest growing storage class across both S3 and Glacier because it is really the place where you put it if you don't quite yet know what you're going to do with it, but you think it's going to come in super handy later in time. And so the place to start is store your data and store it in a place where it's cost effective to grow and it's easy for you to start using later. The second thing I would say is make sure that you have the security model already hardened and defined when you're storing all that data. And you notice what I said is very separate from usage. I'm talking about the first steps of get your data into S3 and Glacier so that you can use it later, and do it in a way where the security model matches what you're trying to do. And so the first thing I say for the security model is turn on block public access. A very small percent of your data ever needs to be publicly accessed. In fact, many of our customers that are using S3 for application usage, they never need to have it be publicly accessed. And that's why when S3 launched 16 years ago, it was locked down by default. So keep it locked down by default and use block public access, which is a control that you can set at the organization account level. And it basically means that not only is all your storage today locked down from public access, but everything that you add to a bucket in the future is locked down too. So that's step one. Get your data in and make sure that you have block public access turned on across your whole company to make sure that nobody ever is accessing your data from outside. In very rare cases, you might have to have it be accessed, but really think about that. If you're doing it for business-to-business transfer of information, use SFTP. Use our AWS SFTP service. That actually lets you securely exchange information that's in your S3 bucket, but it's not by you turning on public access to your bucket and potentially forgetting about it as your bucket grows. So use block public access. The second thing is, when you're putting your security controls on your bucket, start from a place where you, by default, don't provide any access at all to your resources, and really decide how are you going to set up your S3 bucket policy or your access point bucket policy to exclude everything that you're not expecting. So define the very few access patterns that you really want and exclude everything else. And what you're basically doing, your philosophy here, is to create a perimeter around your data that's enforcing your security invariance, okay? And so this point is actually very similar to the first one I made, which is block public access. It gets you protection from unintentionally sharing data publicly. But that is one specific control that you want to put in place. But take that same philosophy of exclusion of access into your bucket and your access policies. And the third thing is when you're setting up all of that data storage that powers all of your usage going forward, encrypt by default. Just encrypt everything. It's very easy to do. You just turn it on in S3. Everything is encrypted by default. And then as you grow, everything is encrypted by default. So Marcia, independent of how those applications are using your data, you start from that foundation of store everything and secure everything by default. And then you can use different experiments, different pilots to see how are you going to access things. And we have many customers that build everything using Lambda, where they're running experiments and then they're evolving that into serverless applications. And they're running entire businesses on all of these different functions that are accessing S3. But start first from that security model and put it on all the data that you have.
Yeah, that's a great piece of feedback because we tend to forget security. And no, please don't forget security. Your data is one of the most valuable assets from your organization. So keep it very secure. And S3 has all these features that you mentioned that they're very easy and actually by default, like the block public access. Basically, don't enable it. Don't touch it, and you will be fine.
That's right.
So basically, then now the companies have all this data in their Glacier, and what is a good strategy to start using it? It's like, is there like a path for basically building a more modern data architecture? How people will start consuming that data? Should they use the raw data? Should they copy it somewhere else? Or is there some good practices there to start using that data?
Well, if you assume that the data is in S3 and Glacier, and you assume that it's locked down with the right type of permissions, then getting started with the data set is quite easy, particularly if you use these access points. And the reason for that is it's a shared data set, Marcia. That's what's so revolutionary about this model, is that when you have a shared data set, you can have any number of applications. And if they are following the access privileges that you have set as part of your access point policy or your bucket policy, they are able to interact with that data in the ways that you have specified in your policy. And so, as an example, if you have a finance application and it's working on a set of data that you have in your bucket, they can potentially, your access point policy says read only. And so how that application evolves, it can evolve according to the business logic and whether the application is built as an application running on EC2 or if it's a serverless application, it's up to the developer. But they're able to, evolve their application, but they never have more than read-only access to the data. Meanwhile, you can have other applications, whether it's a compliance application or it's clickstream analytics, which a lot of our gaming customers use. They're all building their applications on that same data set. And the way that access policies works, or access point policies work, is that you can even fine-grain your policy to provide access to a subset of the data in the shared bucket. So you don't actually have to create copies like you're saying. We do have customers that do that. They create copies of data, and we have. We actually make that easy by making sure we have a cross-region policy engine where you can set up a policy that keeps data in one region synced up with data in another. We also let you do that between buckets in the same region. And so if you have a model where you want to have a master bucket and then you have other buckets in the same region and you want to keep the data synchronized between that, we make that really easy with a policy. But you don't have to. You can still use a shared data set and then use abstractions like access points to help manage your application access to that. And then the decision is up to you as a developer. How do you want to take that application logic, which is now separate from your storage logic, and how do you want to evolve it forward either in a serverless or as an application that's running directly on EC2? It's up to you.
Yeah, but that's one of the hardest kind of changes when you're coming from the more traditional on-prem thing, because you always have to copy the data to the server to start working with it. So
that's
now
right.
the compute and the storage are super separated now. And I think the idea of being like taking the data away, copying it somewhere else, working with it, that's not how, if you don't need to, like, you can use the access points, as you were saying, like you have this data that is shared and you don't need to move it at all. So I think a lot of customers, I was talking with one customer the other day that he was sharing his migration experience to AWS, and the first thing he mentioned is like, my brain exploded when I didn't need to copy everything around all the time. Like it was so cool that I just can leave my data in one place and use it from all my applications.
That's right.
And definitely that's something that is super nice from S3.
That whole model, that's what the chief security officers, they love it. Because one of the problems when you're making so many copies of data and they're just scattered across your company is that you don't really know how all those different copies of data are secured. And so when we work with our customers, their security officers are very excited about this idea of a shared data set with an auditable set of policies, and there's no proliferation of copies that you have to track and manage. And so it's not just easier for developers, it's actually the more secure model for this rapidly growing data set. That's 40% year over year of digital data. And in order to manage that securely and cost effectively, you don't actually want to base it on a model where you're just proliferating copies everywhere.
Yeah. So I think with that question, I will wrap up because I already took a lot of your time. So I want to thank you again for being here. I'm super excited, like a little kid on a circus that I met, because I've been following you around, and I'm really happy that you take the time to talk to me today. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
You too, Marcia. It's been great talking to you, and best of luck being a voice in technology as a woman and a mom.
Thank you. That was it for me today. I hope you liked this interview. This was very different style that I usually do, but I was super happy when she accepted to be my guest. So I hope you like it, and if you did, give please a like and a subscribe to this channel if you're not subscribed already. And I see you in another episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!